This podcast and every other podcast that I make is brought to you by our supporters on Patreon. They get episodes of this particular show early and ad-free, as well as totally unedited cuts if we have edits, and a bunch of other cool bonus content. So if you want to support this very independent show that runs entirely without sponsorships, make sure you check us out on Patreon. Casey's mod is consuming my life right now. It is basically Act 1 of Inscription as a roguelike. And I'm on like level 3 of it right now. You get, different decks, whatever. And some of them are like sort of buffed. So they're not, or debuffed. So they're not as good. Like the Ouroboros doesn't carry through levels. And you get challenges. So you have to get to the next sort of tier, unlock a certain, or accept a certain amount of challenges. So the one that I just started is all boss fights are totem battles. All regular battles are totem battles. Pelts from the trapper cost more. You start without the hook.
And is it just the first act of the game kind of condensed, so all the crazy shit that happens later is removed effectively?
Yeah, because I just replayed it recently. I replayed the entire game in one sitting. And I think without the, whoa, what the fuck's going on appeal of Acts 2 and 3, they're not as good. I was like, man, I just wish this game was Act 1 forever. And Casey's mod is effectively that. It is just Act 1 forever.
It's funny, I was just watching a video from Adam Millard? Do you know this YouTube channel? The Gaming Architect, I think is what it's called.
Sounds familiar.
I'm pretty sure it's Millard or Millard, the Architect of Games.
Mm-hmm.
Similar to the Game Maker's Toolkit and channels like that, does a lot of interesting analysis. And he had a video that I just the other day watched about this phenomenon of games where that, some are designed around their replayability and the iteration and the continuous mining of depth or mining of just an experience, and that the recurrence of that experience is pretty much the same each time, versus the one-offs, where will you ever quite experience, like he used the example of the suicide mission in Mass Effect 2. He goes, can that ever really hit the same on a second playthrough as it does the first? And there are a lot of game moments like that. I feel that way about
Tunic. Tunic is, which I have a copy of right here, everybody. Absolutely love this game. It's incredible. That's one of those ones that I'm like, man, I wish I could replay that again, because the mysteries in that game, you definitely cannot experience twice. Even Breath of the Wild is kind of that.
I think it's great. To me, it's one of those, he was not framing it in his video as some kind of design weakness by any stretch.
No, I feel positively about it.
It's more just the reason why we did that 10th anniversary re-recording of Journey was because I had
Journey's
gotten
totally
so
one
many
of those
emails.
games.
Yeah, people said for years, like, if I could erase the memory of any game and play it for the first time again, Journey would be my number one. I got that email from folks a lot, and I thought, well, if I redo the score, I can, in a new way but faithful at the same time, I can hopefully give you some little taste of that feeling of experiencing a familiar thing new again.
A fresh version.
What motivated that? Because there's so many things. There's so many films that I've seen where I just thought, man, imagine seeing that.
What would your game pick be? Like, I think mine is probably Tunic. Like that, if I could play any game for the first time, it would be Tunic. People say Skyrim, which I always feel like is a really interesting choice for that particular experiment.
There's a bunch that would be amazing to play for the first time again. Obviously, Mass Effect holds a very dear place to my heart, and in particular, playing the Citadel DLC in Mass Effect 3. I got so wrapped into it and so kind of emotionally invested that to kind of relive that would be wonderful. The original BioShock, the 1-2 punch of BioShock and BioShock Infinite, of the way those two games begin as kind of mirrors of each other. The descent down to Rapture, the ascent up to Columbia. Particularly after, because BioShock is still to this day for me one of the greatest games ever made. The original BioShock is just absolutely one of those, like,
I don't think many people would argue
for games.
Yeah, I think you're pretty safe with that one.
But Infinite to me is very, very nearly matches it in every way. And really the only thing it doesn't have that the original had is that the original was so new and fresh at the time. And the second one, or the Infinite rather, continued that tradition. But still, that feeling I remember having as you descend down the clouds, and instead of this glorious, Gary Shyman tumultuous music with the violin solo that you get welcoming you into rapture, as Andrew Ryan is, I aspire to something different. Amazing, amazing moment. But the contrast, that first time experience, the simple piano, the sort of out of tune piano that then gives way to the choir doing the "Will the Circle Be Unbroken" kind of hymn tune, and then you end up and it's like this baptism scene. It was like, fucking hell, what am I getting into here? It was just so, that moment was so powerful.
Yeah.
It really, talk about, they always say like with a song, with a movie, with a book, how you start your intro is like 80% of the experience, because if you nail the intro, you've got it on the right foot, and now there's buy-in. Now there's, I am giving everything from this point forward the benefit of the doubt because you hooked me so instantly. And
it's interesting because, my example is Tunic, right? Tunic doesn't do that. Tunic's intro is, you think it's Zelda. You wake up as a little fox on a beach and you walk through a town and everything looks like Zelda. And I think it's really easy to dismiss because you're like, yeah, it's Zelda, whatever. Until you get like a few hours in and you go, oh, holy fuck, this is not Zelda. Like it's just this huge, very different thing. But I guess that I always call that the opening the vault moment, which like is obviously a very video gamified way of talking about that. But like the moment in a Fallout where the vault opens and you see the whole world. They do that in Skyrim as well. And it's like, I think a big part of what lost a lot of people for Starfield, where it doesn't have that Bethesda formula. There's no open the vault moment. The open the vault moment would be the first time you go to space, which in that game is not, it doesn't have the same, whoa, I can go here because things just look like little planets in a giant empty space. It's like a very different kind of feeling.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Those moments, if you can nail it.
I'm trying to think. I don't think the Breath of the Wild does that initially. It doesn't. Breath of the Wild, you're on the plains at first. It's the one part of that game that has like terrible frame rate drops, and it's kind of a tutorial.
Wonder what's the opposite? Like, what's the best game that you cherish that starts weak and you push through anyway? I know that for a lot of people,
Final Fantasy is the lightning ones. Is that 13? I think she's 13. People say that about that game all the time.
I definitely heard that a lot about Death Stranding also. They were like, you just got to play 20 hours and then you'll love it. And there's a reason why I never finished that game or even came close to finishing it. Because to me, that's a level of investment. I just have too many games I've not played to accept an investment.
I agree.
Even if they're saying, I suppose anything short of unanimous consent of among millions of players that it's the greatest game ever made, provided you can get over that. If it was touted as truly a landmark in civilization and
which
in
doesn't
culture
exist.
and in art, I never heard that people loved it. I actually heard a lot of, like, after it had been out about a year, I started to hear more and more real strong advocacy for Death Stranding.
Oh, for sure. But
it always came with that caveat.
And it's still never consistent. Like, some people just don't like that game. I think it's maybe once it reveals itself to be the first Strand type game. When it reveals itself to be something a lot more meditative than you would have initially thought is probably that point that people are referring to. But even then, I think it's like inconsistent. Like, not everybody feels that way about it. Death Stranding is a good example. I'm trying to think of other games that like really good.
I can tell you one that's a minor example is the first time I installed and played Divinity Original Sin 2. You start off on a boat as a kind of prisoner being transported to that island. And for whatever reason, that opening sequence I bounced off of and was like, I don't think this is an interesting game. And I bailed. And then a year later...
You end up like on the shores. And then I think the initial quests are all kind of boring. And that game probably isn't appealing.
As original. Yeah, compared to the way Baldur's Gate 3 kind of comes in hot straight out of the gate with an interesting, premise immediately.
And it's hard. Baldur's Gate 3 is like, you better learn straight away.
Yeah, that's true too. But when I went back, like I would count now Divinity among
I
my
love that
favorite
game.
games ever. Like I'm so glad I gave it a second chance. So it's one of those. There's just enough of those examples where you go, I really shouldn't write it off too quickly.
Yeah.
But it is an uphill. Like it is an interesting. It is well worth. I mean, I've talked to folks. I think, like it's not uncommon where people will say, "Oh, the first third of our game is polished like double."
That's
doubly
super common.
well polished.
Yeah, because people won't see the end of it.
Yeah,
You got to make sure the start of it's bug free.
I guess that's true. I guess there's sort of two phenomena overlapping there because the comparatively low. I know we've talked about that on here before a bunch of the surprisingly low lack of completion rates among gamers. That's sort of only further reason why the end of the game can be less polished than the beginning. But also just that idea that, there's not a lot of patience for.
Yeah.
I want to lure you in and then 4 hours later go, aha, but it's actually this kind of game. It's so interesting because doesn't that seem like that would be cool? Doesn't that seem like you go, oh, I was really sure it was going to be this. And then, holy shit, it just turned into a different game. I do think
Tunic does that. And it's an interesting choice because, and Tunic's, made by a really small team as well, right? So, you think it's Zelda. It seems like a Zelda clone. Even the way they marketed it, it's like, it's just Zelda, whatever. And you'll play it because you like Zelda. And then you get to a point, it's maybe 5 hours in. Mm-hmm. It could even be further than that. I mean, it's Zelda Dark Souls, but the point where you realize how big the puzzle of Tunic is, however far in that is, I think, a very cool reveal that you're like, oh, holy fuck, because the puzzle's right in front of you the whole time, and you just don't realize what the puzzle is until you do, and you're like, holy fucking shit, this was here the whole time, that's crazy. But it's such an interesting gotcha because it kind of requires the player to be willing to invest the time in the Zelda, which I guess it works in Tunic because the Zelda parts are very good. They're already good. It's just it just doesn't stand out as unique, right? But I think the choosing to have the opening moment not be good to lure somebody in, again, it's not good in Tunic, but it seems like that's an intentional choice. Breath of the Wild, it doesn't feel like it's an intentional choice. It's just they're just giving you the tutorial and then expanding on it.
I opened up my Steam library to see if I can think of other games that do this because it's suddenly I'm very preoccupied in this moment by this question.
Games that start bad but get good.
Yeah, or they start maybe not even bad, but they start deceptive about what it will be. It could be the best Zelda clone ever at the beginning of Tunic, and then you realize it's not a Zelda clone, but you could go, I like it as a Zelda clone. So it's not even necessarily that you are tempted to write it off. It's more just that it pulls a trick on you. It pulls a kind of magician.
It's a gotcha for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is not a great example, but I remember reading feedback from one of my colleagues who on Stray Gods, where they clearly, it was very obvious that they only played through up to the first song because they go, oh, I see how the interactivity was handled, where basically the songs would just reach a decision point and then loop infinitely until you made your choice. And it was a telltale sign that they didn't actually kind of get into the meat of the game, because the first song is literally the only one in the whole game that will hold position while you decide, because we don't want to assume that the player can instantly understand
the mechanic,
how this mechanic works. And we want to give them a chance to really read through the menu and know what the different traits mean. But the result is that if you're judging the kind of breadth of the storytelling that these songs are capable of based on that opening song, you'll walk away with a fraction of a percent of perception of it.
But that's 5 minutes in, isn't it?
Yeah, very obviously they barely played it.
Very quick.
It is. We get to it pretty quick. But
yeah.
I wouldn't know. I don't know how to solve that problem nonetheless, because if you're going on snap decisions and snap instincts, it's definitely going to trick you in that moment.
You kind of can't. There are so many things in game design. Have you seen, I'm sure we've spoken about this before as well, people criticizing the yellow tape or the yellow spray paint as a tutorial function?
Yeah, I saw this on Twitter, and I usually just as soon as I see people righteously indignant about something that strikes me as stupid, I tend to move on and not
Great
even
way
really
to use the
research
internet.
what it was.
Great way.
What it was
Great
about.
way to do it.
So what even was going on there? What was the?
I haven't seen it
criticism?
happen recently, but I think it's a recurring argument that the fact that video games have to tell you what's breakable with the yellow box is bad game design. Is kind of like, or like a yellow stripe on a box is bad game design. Is kind of the thesis.
I thought the conventional wisdom was the exact opposite.
It is the exact opposite.
Having like a language that gamers can intuit.
Yeah, and the thing is, I think that gamers, there's this weird thing where video games are made to be beaten, right? Like they're made for you to be able to finish them. Inscription is such a good example of this. When you play Inscription and then you play Casey's mod, Inscription Act 1 is made for you to finish. Casey's mod isn't. They don't make it so you can finish it. They don't even make it easy to finish. It's very RNG. And you can have strategies or whatever, but it's like, it's not trying to help you get there, really. It's much harder. And so the yellow language is a means to tell you you can interact with something consistently. Everyone who plays it, every new player can interact with something. And I get, the criticism is like, but it's dumb. It's too obvious. There's sometimes a disconnect between people complaining about things that happen in a video game and what they actually want. It being obvious is like beneficial to your gameplay experience, even if that criticism is a fun criticism to make. The same as the like Nathan Drake ludonarrative dissonance shoots people, he kills thousands of people. Yeah, but it's because it's fun to play. You have to kind of like weigh up. Yeah, it's the language of the thing, and you have to weigh up, okay, well, are you talking about this because it sounds interesting to talk about, or are you talking about it because it actually has a negative or positive impact on your gameplay experience? And I think that playing a game where you got rid of all of the yellow tape, for example, you would more often be frustrated than not, because there would be so many things you would attempt to interact with just to learn that you can't. There's certainly like a case to be made for, like, if we could make things like that, like that's an environmental storytelling insofar as it informs mechanics, like not a narrative storytelling, right? Like that's literally what it's trying to do. You could maybe make it so they don't exist and that you just like get a button prompt come up when you get closer, to have that for some players and not for other players. But then what's the difference? Like that just means you have to walk closer to it to get the button prompt. Why?
And also theoretically speaking, it's less immersive and engaging that you solve with UI what can be done in world.
Yeah.
It's like Dead Space was the classic sort of masterclass of that, where so little sort of conventional UI and to the immense benefit of the game.
Tunic, similarly, like Tunic has again, I fucking love Tunic. And Inscription, evidently. Tunic has almost no English. There's no tutorial.
Right.
Almost no English language. It comes with a guidebook, which I actually have inside this, which is why I bought it. I mean, it's mostly this language that's on the front here. Everything looks like that. There is a puzzle in Tunic that requires you to decipher the language. I did not do that one because I think that would be insane. But like, this is what your tutorial pages look like.
Yep.
So you just kind of have to figure out what it means. But it's all this different language, and it's such a good
It reminds me a little bit of
so
one of the
good.
most amazing GDC talks I ever attended, which was for 10 years they did a series called it was like the developer pitch or something like that.
Yeah, I've seen that.
They're so good, where they would a month before GDC they would send their 5 noteworthy game designer panelists a prompt, and then they were to come and each give their elevator pitch of what they would make inspired by that prompt.
Mm-hmm.
Just as a thought experiment for fun, for creative discussion. And for the final one, the prompt was humanity's last game. That's all that was the entire prompt.
God, what a cool prompt.
And it was one of the best hours ever at GDC. I'm sure it's on YouTube or certainly in the GDC vault. It was so amazing. And Will Wright was my favorite of the 5 that day, because he was basically saying, I interpret this prompt to mean, how do I make a game that preserves the memory of humanity, assuming our impending or eventual extinction, whether it's impending, whether it's short-term or long-term. At some point, there will be no humans left. And if we want to leave behind a time capsule that we think represents the best version of ourselves, or at least the most accurate version of ourselves that we want to put out into the world. How do you do that? Because he was using as an example, if you just take a random slice of what's on Facebook, there's the signal to noise ratio would make it impossible for an outsider to really know what mattered to people, truly mattered.
Yeah.
You know, like on any given thing, you're going to be looking at food pictures or like a random news where someone's like sharing an article and outraged about this, that, or the other. But if you ask them, is this what you would want to leave behind? That's not really what their answer would be. So he was trying to figure out how do we kind of gamify our memories. And I found his pitch, the details of which I honestly can't remember, but he was inspired by that classic Star Trek episode, The Inner Light, where Picard has to live through the last like 60 years or so of a civilization in a kind of time capsule way. He's like, can we make a game that effectively does that? Where you would invite someone to kind of live through that. That was his. I thought it was great. But the reason I bring it up is because Jason Rohr, the guy that made that game called Passage, he was the winner, hands down, like by vote. You know, the audience sort of votes and they choose a champion. And Jason Rohr won because he actually made the game that he pitched, which is not the exercise.
Came out in 2007.
No. This is much later than the game that he made was a physical board game.
Oh, it says Passage by Jason.
That's just what he was known for. That's why he was on the panel because this was maybe 10 years ago.
Sorry, you mean the thing he made at GDC is not Passage. That's the game that he made. I see.
Yeah, Passage is like his first claim to fame as a developer. And what made him a noteworthy person and why they invited him onto the panel. That was like I say his name and it's the credit in parentheses following his name.
Yes, I understand, yes.
Yeah. So, but Jason, his response to Humanity's Last Game was, I want to make a board game that can be played by someone that I'll never meet. And he talked about cathedral builders working on a cathedral that their father worked on it and their children will work on it, but none of them will ever see the completion of this thing. It's for future generations. He said, I want to make a game with that in mind. And so he designed a physical board game out of titanium that could basically withstand all manner of weather phenomenon and it would be really hard to damage.
Wow.
And the pieces were sealed in the pieces, like the game pieces, kind of like chess pieces, bracketed on to it so that and could get screwed into place so that they would be very hard to separate and get lost from the board itself. Like you could easily store this thing. And he's showing photos in a machine shop on his deck, and we're going, did he fucking actually make this game? Like it's supposed to be a hypothetical fun experiment. And he developed a rule set for the game that would be very fundamental and very easy to grasp, like chess or checkers or games where it doesn't take a lot and thousands of cultures and different languages and all that could understand it. And then to your tunic point, he said, I needed to be able to describe the rules without resorting to language, because what if English is no longer a language? What if no current language is any longer a language? So then he showed his primer on, developing basic pictographic language where, we have a ramp and a ball rolls down. We can establish the idea that gravity and movement. And so that becomes sort of a baseline. Now I can use that as a shorthand to describe movement, that kind of thing. And then to cap it all off, he goes, I wanted to ensure that no one would ever find this, but it is findable. And so he goes, I ran an algorithm. He goes, there's in the state of Nevada, I think it was Nevada, it might have been Arizona, somewhere with a copious amounts of desert. He goes, there are like millions of acres of publicly owned land, meaning they are theoretically owned broadly by all of us as taxpayers, but there's nothing there. They're just empty. And so there's no fences around them like private property might have. So he said, I basically generated 1 million GPS coordinates that fall. Also, they had to be no closer than 1 mile and no further than 5 miles from the nearest road, which means you have to be able to go on foot off of the road a minimum of a mile. So using that as his criteria, basically abandoned or never used land that's accessible broadly by anybody, but nonetheless at least a mile from the nearest road. He generated 1 million GPS coordinates that fit that description and then chose one at random and went to it, buried it in the desert low enough that it would show up like crazy on a metal detector, but is not obviously above ground and would get washed away if there was a big rainstorm or something like that. And then
so
he threw
cool.
away. He even used a phone, a burner phone or something like that, to go to the GPS coordinates, so that, and then he just destroyed it and got rid of it so that he had no actual record of it.
So he can't even find it? Wow.
So he can't go. And then he goes, here's the thing. Someone in this room knows, because if you all look under your chair, everybody reaches down. Each person, there was about 1,000 of us in the room. Each one of us had a piece of paper with 1,000 GPS coordinates on it. 1,000 times 1,000. There was his list of 1,000,000. So he goes, I don't know which, but some paper in here actually does have the actual coordinates. I just don't know. But one of you theoretically could go find it if this was a project you wanted to do.
That's
so it's like
crazy.
It brought the house down. To me, I actually thought Will Wright captured the Humanity's Last Game prompt the best, which is why I voted for him. But holy shit, rarely has there ever been a
Did you keep your piece of paper?
No, they actually gathered them up as people were leaving. They were like, we kind of want to organize an effort to find this. Because he goes, if one person visited at X time, it will take like it'll take like 1,000 years to find, and we'll all be dead. And so it was, he intentionally made
cool.
a list that was sort of not going to be solved in our lifetime, but somebody said, no, gather up so we have all the GPS in one place. And I don't know whatever happened after that.
That's cheating, though.
I mean, look, it was the fact that I can remember in such detail the contents of, like, the one I voted for, I remember less well. I remember Will Wright's pitch less well than the one that won, because it was so profoundly impactful. But anyway, that Tunic idea of, can we create a language that theoretically then anyone could learn, is a really compelling and probably way underutilized game design concept.
Yeah, again,
really
I chose
long
not
story to +1 year.
No, it's a great story. I chose not to learn the language in Tunic, but again, I mean, it might even be considered a spoiler that there's a puzzle that can be solved with the language. To be clear, I don't even know where you find that puzzle. Actually, I think I might have an idea of where you find it. But yeah, there's some English in here. But like, if I show you this, it's just that, well, it's gonna blur itself, but you can't.
It's very impossible to see.
This just says the ruined atoll.
Right.
That all means something. There is information on there, but I never deciphered it.
It's such a wonderful throwback to that era.
It's exactly what it was inspired by.
The 90s, like, Myst, where you have to freaking have your pen and paper to have any hope of beating this game.
I played the whole of The Witness with a pen and paper and a mirror. So that for the mirror parts, I could just draw whatever object I need. I mean, The Witness is such a good example of a language in a video game, right? Like, it is its own language that it teaches you from the jump, and then you find out how to communicate in that language by the end without it ever actually giving you any tutorial that has language. It's so fucking cool. It's just such a cool way to do that. It's so unique to video games as well. Like,
I have another entry. Sorry, go ahead. Finish your thought.
I was just, Tunic's puzzles get so in depth that it's like, if you want, you don't have to do this, but if you want, then there are things in it that I think I got the 100% completion on it, but there's still stuff that's like, again, if I someday I'm like, I'm going to go back to Tunic and I want to do that language puzzle, it would take me a long fucking time, even on top of the hours I've already put into that game. I've never done organically the Jindosh riddle in Dishonored 2. And I often think, so a level in Dishonored 2, maybe 4 levels in, has one of those, it doesn't even need to be explained. Jindosh riddle is what it's called, and you could put it on a piece of paper and write it down. And I've always wanted to like do it and get a group of people in a room together to try to solve it. Because I think it allows you to get through the level easier, but it's got to be one of the most Googled things on the planet. And I've always like, man, one day I'll actually sit down and solve that riddle, the Jindosh riddle. I love Dishonored 2. Such a good game. Yeah, it's basically, I always think
of that as your go-to, like your number one ever, isn't it?
It's pretty close. It's not my number one ever. I just feel extremely passionate about the level design in Dishonored 2, and it makes it stand out so much.
Number one designed game or something like that. Like, maybe not all subcomponents weighed together. It's close to number one, but when discussing specifically game design or even
probably
just, level design, I just know you touted it as like
It's incredible.
Your reigning champion.
A lot of people really prefer Dishonored 1, but yeah, again, it's the level design in Dishonored 2 I just think is outstanding. Yeah, so the Jindosh riddle is at a dinner party. You got a bunch of people. The women sat in a row. They all wore different characters. One of them wore a jaunty colored hat. Character 2 was the far left. You know, it's one of those where it's like, what order were they sitting in is what you have to figure out. I don't remember the name of that actual puzzle, but it's just unbelievably difficult. And I would really, really love to actually do it. Sorry, okay, I've got it here exactly. At the dinner party were Lady Winslow, Dr. Marcola, Countess Conti, Madame Nazio, and Baroness Finch. The women sat in a row. They all wore different colors, and Dr. Marcella wore a jaunty white hat. Baroness Finch was at the far left. So it's just figuring out who owned each heirloom is what it comes to after several paragraphs. It's so complicated, but you don't have to solve it to get through. You
Puzzles like that are, for whatever reason, a huge blind spot for me. I get impatient, I think. It's sort of like the classic, not as bad, these I can work through, but I never really enjoy them, are the classic ones where it's, you know, you need to get the object in column A into column C, and you can only do it by certain specific moves where, like, you can only move the bottom of the column and then it moves things sideways, or all those kinds of puzzles, you know, where you're shifting things that have very pre-baked move sets and possibilities.
I'm also very bad at those.
There's one in Mass Effect that you use to restart the generator on one of the planets in Mass Effect 1, and it's one of those where it's so left field that because you're playing this sci-fi action shooter RPG, and then there's just this puzzle of like restart the generator by, you know, you have to order these 3 columns into this. And fortunately, it's one of those where if you just use your Omni Gel, you can just bypass it. Yeah. But for whatever reason, those kinds of puzzles, it's the Die Hard thing, you know, where it's like I have a 5-gallon jug of water and I have a 7-gallon jug of water and I need to somehow end up with 6 gallons.
Yep, I'm also very bad at those. I have a really unique problem with audio. If I can edit a video and the audio is out of sync, I know it's out of sync, but I cannot tell if it's ahead or behind. And it will. Oh, interesting. And it's such a weird brain deficiency that it seems like it should be so simple, but I'm always like, wait. Is it 2 seconds ahead? Hang on, now I've moved it too far behind? Like, it's just a thing. So unless I map the exact, like, beginning of an audio peak to a mouth, so it's exact, I won't figure it out. Like, I can't actually, my brain can't do it.
Well, but you could surely, because this happens all the time in what I do, where if something is giving your brain for a loop, just put it like 5 seconds late, where there's just no question, and then back into it where, you know, because then you know for sure what direction it's coming from.
But I'll match it up wrong and then be in the same position again. Like, it's just, my brain just can't do it. It is funny to watch certain brain deficiencies like that apply.
This is why we slate.
It's true.
Really hard to fuck that up.
Yeah, I sometimes, if I know I'm retaking things and I want to edit something quickly, I'll clap into my own microphone. Like, I started clapping if I'm doing a YouTube video and I want to, like, cut a whole minute or something. I just clap afterwards and go, I'm not going to use that, so I don't have to re-listen to anything. But I also edit in 4 times speed.
Oh man, that's so smart. I should do, because all the videos really well. I put out, my assistant Dallas edits, and so often I'll speak. I'll do like a 2-minute tirade about something, and then I'll go, I didn't like any of that. Dallas, sorry, don't use any of that.
Clap.
And I'll just leave him a note.
So then he doesn't have to read it.
Yeah, he has to listen to it to get to that point.
Yep. Gotta get those claps in.
I do sometimes say, unless I think it's worse than it is, in which case I trust your judgment. So looking at my Steam list here, here's another one. I ranked it, I pulled up my library based on hours played, and I'm just like scrolling from the most played to the least. And I love how a bug that for some reason was in the Steam build of Assassin's Creed Black Flag, it would count when my computer was off even as hours I was in that game. I don't know how that happened.
When I used to work for Xbox back in the day, when we would attend events as like Microsoft employees, I had to go to like Gamescom or whatever, they would print out your most played game on Xbox, and mine was Assassin's Creed Black Flag. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. And I don't think that's a Steam specific issue. I was like, there's no way that is my most played Xbox game ever. No.
Yeah. For me, it shows up 409 hours. And it's because you remember in that game how you could like capture ships and then send them to like England to gather materials. And it was kind of like a mini sub-game.
I loved that mini game.
It was cool, but for some reason it counted those hours as you playing the game. Because I was running in the background. Yeah, well, the game wouldn't even be running. It just it taps into a real world clock because it would go, this ship will be back from South Africa in 36 real world hours. So we'll see you on Wednesday if you want to have that ship back in your port or whatever.
Yeah.
But I remember I would come back and I'd notice that Steam had 36 hours more playtime logged, and I was like, well, wait a minute, the game wasn't even open. So anyway, setting that one aside, as I scroll down here, I get to at 32 hours played, Spiritfarer. That is one where I would argue almost the flip, where it presents itself as this very emotional, very tender game about loss and letting go. And then the more I played it, I was like, this is a fishing and like gear grinding game. Like 90% of those 32 hours I played it were definitely not consoling lost souls and seeing them off into the afterlife. It's super beautiful. And look, I played it 32 hours, so like clearly I didn't hate it. But I would say that is a game that kind of presented one thing, and it presented that one thing as its core conceit. But the reality, the actual lived experience of it is really not that thing. And you have to play it a bit to
Is that not also a ludonarrative dissonance? Really, the narrative and the gameplay didn't line up? Because I don't think they did that on. I don't think they did that on purpose. I think that that is supposed to be the narrative, but you're right that the narrative is not what you experience.
And also, I will acknowledge, I have a tendency to play. Even though I almost never platinum games, I do have a little bit of a completionist play style where I get most games to like probably 95%.
Yep.
Meaning like on an open world game, like you think of an Assassin's Creed or the Insomniac Spider-Man, I can't leave icons on the map. I just can't.
I've just come to terms with this in myself recently, and I'd be very curious to see if you align with it. I realized that my single biggest toxic habit is especially professionally, that I have to finish things. So if I get a task, it can be a huge task, and I will work 20 hours in one day because I don't want to put the task down and walk away. Like every time I make a YouTube video, I record it and then immediately edit it and then immediately upload it. I will not walk away. I do the same thing with work, where it's like sometimes it can't be done in 20 hours. I will sit there and finish it in one go, and I can't space things up. Like I just can't divide them through days. I'd be very curious how that works with music. Like I would think that you're probably in a similar boat where like you feel like you've got a spark of something and you don't want to drop it. You just want to keep going. But it's
so interesting. I have learned. Yeah, Angela is a lot more like you. I'll go, it's not worth your time to like once you've put 6 hours into this task, you've gotten it to 99%. Another 6 hours for that additional 1% is an opportunity cost on other things you could be doing that I think make it not worth that the subsequent 6 hours. Like you will move the needle so little compared to the first. This is obviously specific to certain kinds of tasks, obviously. But
yeah, it makes sense that would apply to art.
Or it's not even necessarily art, but it'll be like stuff around the home where she'll go, I want to do this, and I'll go, that's fine, but like there's some other things that strike me as higher priority, and then I'll come home and she'll be like bleary-eyed, 12 hours sunk on this one thing, and look, the results will always be amazing.
Does she have ADHD?
I don't think so.
It's a pretty ADHD. It's
more just like a stubborn, like she's a perfectionist for sure.
Yeah.
That's where this ultimately stems from, because the results always are amazing.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. It's more just me trying to go a little easier on yourself. With regard to me, though, I'm actually, in a way, I've learned, I think it was probably originally a lot like the way you just described yourself. I'm actually now much more the diametric opposite, where a friend of mine, a composer named Mason Lieberman, wrote this on Twitter the other day, and he all but took the words out of my mouth because I so deeply agree, where for me, the best thing is if I'm working on a piece and I get up a lot of steam and I feel like, oh, I know exactly where this is going to go. That's exactly where it's going to, like, I know exactly what to do next. I will stop at that point because it is so much easier to pick it up full of ideas than to run out of steam like a ship that's come aground on a beach and then go, oh, fuck, now I have to wake up the next morning and stare at it. It's even harder.
I do that for myself with any writing that I do as a hobby. I leave it when I know exactly what the next page is rather than finishing the next page, because then you can start again and you don't like walk into writer's block.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
with work, I go, this is the task. Here's my due date. I'm going to finish the task in one hit. It's, again, I'm not doing the 99% thing. Like, it's not like I'm like adding 6 hours of 1%. It's more that like, I just, instead of taking 4 days to finish it, I'll finish it in one terrible day.
Right.
And just, but I must not stop that task.
Is that
it's because I get into it, for sure.
Is there, what becomes of the other 3 days? Is it new tasks or is it breathing room and slower pace? Like, are you investing in
I'm not doing it
a relaxed pace later?
No, I'm not doing it for those reasons. Yes, it would mean that the other days are very chill, like that I have less on those days. But that is not why I'm doing it. It's not to have chiller days. It's just because once I've started the task, I want to complete the task immediately.
Right.
You know? It's not smart, and I need to stop. But I get so like, but I don't want to stop. I must continue doing it. And I do it with video games as well. That's why, like, if I play something like Cocoon is another really good example of a game that doesn't have any words and puzzles Cocoon's really cool, actually. Also,
I like that game.
Same game designer as Limbo, I believe.
I think the designer, it was not the director from Playdead.
I think lead designer
from Limbo and Inside left.
Yeah. And it's I think it's on Game Pass. It's like 5 hours. I finished it in one hit, maybe a little bit longer. But that game does a really cool thing with puzzles as well, where if you were to try to explain what you're doing in a late game puzzle, the words wouldn't make sense. I was sitting next to Rahul while like playing one of those late game puzzles, and I was like, damn, that was really cool. And he's like, what was it? And I was like, so there's these worlds, right? You put a world inside another world, and then you move one, and you line it up so that something goes through both worlds. Like, it doesn't make any sense, but the way that the game like slowly tells you how those things work is so organic that you understand the logic, even if you could never articulate the logic. It does a really, really good job of... I think it might be my favorite genre of video game. Puzzle game that does not have any English. Puzzle game that invents its own language.
Yeah. It's funny how...
Doom 93 is probably my favorite game. Really, that's puzzle game with no English.
I've really come to, working on Journey.
That's exactly what Journey
heavily
is,
influenced my taste. I mean, Journey is, it would be very generous to say Journey has puzzles.
Yeah.
Because it's not meant to be difficult. It's meant to be experiential.
Yeah.
So to the extent that they're puzzles, they're trivially easy by design.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, that starkly minimalist, like I like to, it's funny because I love Mass Effect because I'm the guy that goes and reads the fucking codex and loves to know what the lore people decided.
Yeah, which is like the
would be
opposite,
a cool
right?
explanation. Yeah. So like on the one hand, I've got that as my reigning champion, probably favorite gaming, desert island experience of all time. But yet, if you ask me on any given day, what do I want to play? It's going to be a Cocoon, Inside, Tunic.
Same.
Those
Witness.
Poetic, concise Witness.
Tunic's long and very Dark Soulsy in its boss fights. So Tunic, a lot of people drop off of because it gets hard.
Right.
But you can gamify it, it's fine. The Cocoon, Inside, Limbo, it's just such a fucking good genre of like finding a language that doesn't exist. Like, it's so cool.
It's not easy to do. I'm scrolling through my Steam.
Well, I googled games that have bad beginnings and great endings, and a lot of people are mentioning The Witcher 3. I don't actually remember The Witcher 3's intro area very well. I don't remember what you do at the start of that game. Red Dead Redemption 2, that's an interesting one.
Something
slow.
That's an offshoot of this. It's a tangent, but it's sort of related. Is the idea of when games steadily introduce new mechanics throughout versus they try to play their cards up front. Like, for example, one of the strengths, I think, of Jedi Fallen Order and Survivor is the fact that they're basically like lightsaber, a very small cocktail of force powers, and we're gonna squeeze the rag of that for the whole game. in a way that I admire. I don't love that the second one was so platformy with its answer to that and less combat-y, but that's just my personal taste. I still admire the design conceit that we're going to basically give you all the mechanics pretty early and then just try to think of 1,000 variations. What made me think of this just now is as I scroll down, I've been playing a game lately called Humanity. Did you play Humanity?
I don't know if I know what Humanity is. Let me check on my Steam if I played it. I liked it, but then I found myself played Humanity. Yeah,
I just couldn't stop playing it, and so it really.
No, I played a demo. Sorry, go ahead.
It's really fun, but it's one of those that it pretty steadily, like if someone just goes and looks up a playthrough on YouTube and checks 30 minutes and then 90 minutes and then 3 hours, it's totally different mechanics. Well, not totally, but it builds on the existing ones and adds wildly different ones constantly over the span of the game, which I think is also very cool if you can pull that off. But it's an interesting gamble because you might have some really cool stuff that you want to wait, but you're also saying, I need you to be interested enough to play for 10 hours to see like the really crazy shit we thought of, you know? And I don't know. It's an interesting.
Well, we've spoken about this game a bunch of times.
I'd be curious.
It's a Mike-ass video game.
Yeah.
Mike is at DICE Awards, by the way, everybody. We've spoken about it before, but A Way Out? No, that's not the game. The marriage one, but made by Joseph Fares.
The marriage one? You mean the Honey I Shrunk the Kids game?
Yes.
Why the hell can't I think of?
Yes. What's it called? Joseph Fares. It's not A Way Out. It's
so stupid. It's like a way bigger hit than It Takes Two.
It Takes Two. Similar thing where It Takes Two is basically like 5 games in one game with completely different mechanics that it never reuses in a way that kind of keeps that wonder there in a very similar way, because you're like, holy shit, how did this game do that? And I still don't understand the scope of that game at all. I don't know how they made it. And it's a very interesting choice to like never reuse. Like I can't imagine doing that at my current job, being like, we're gonna use it once for an hour and then we're gonna get rid of it. Like they'd be like, what? Like it's such a unique approach to game development in general to just be like, fuck it, you're never gonna use that nail gun again. Now it's honey or whatever it is.
I wonder if that's one of those things that over time, not to open a can of worms, but if kind of AI, if there's a world in which the streamlining of the development of assets that make somehow lower cost could invite more of that, because that's the biggest thing going up against it is, you know, you develop massively bespoke content, then your game can only scale so far. I mean, this was obviously what we ran into with Stray Gods, is if the only way to make wildly branching interactive musical numbers is just write a fuck ton of music and then get the actors in the booth for 1,000,000 hours, then yeah, there's no limit as long as we can just keep doing that. There's no way to systematize it. But obviously there's something really cool about crafted moments that are really think about BioShock, the entire set piece around Cohen and the guy playing piano, and that's an extremely one-off moment. You only make one of those for
BioShock Infinite is such a good example of set pieces. BioShock Infinite is the Songbird moment. BioShock Infinite is a series of elaborate set pieces.
Yeah, and there's no way to cheaply do that in today's tool set, and maybe forever. Which
is why that Ken Levine Lego talk, which I'm sure we brought up a million times here before, is so interesting, and why I'm so interested in Judas, which is Ken Levine's next game, is the idea of, which again, it's also a frustrating part about why we keep talking about AI. There are totally things AI will be able to help us with. We can already do a lot of this like narrative building block stuff without needing AI, or any new companies to do it really. But like the idea of you can play a bunch of different things out of order and you'll get a red Lego piece and a blue Lego piece, and they're all building the same house, but it'll be different colors and like slightly different shapes depending on who played it. In order to be able to do that, you have to get rid of the set piece. You cannot have a songbird. It can't exist in those moments. And it'd be such an interesting thing to see, like maybe if we do have certain types of AI that help facilitate that, or just like what Ken Levine's game is in general, Judas, to see where the payoff is for players of, I called it a playoff, nice. But to see like,
well done. Term coined.
Do people prefer the songbird moment to be there and be scripted and to experience it, even though they're experiencing the same thing that everybody else is while playing a game? Or are they going to prefer knowing they are having effectively a unique playthrough of something that nobody else can replicate? Like, which of those is inherently more value to a player? And I don't think we know the answer to that yet because we haven't had enough of these like Lego building block games. They don't really exist
but
yet.
I think that the massive popularity of roguelikes and games that involve a lot of iteration or wild open world kind of experiences do tend to suggest that the enduring popularity, at least, is on the I had my experience, and
that maybe the player impacting or feeling like they've created the experience can be more powerful than a pre-scripted set piece. Like, I definitely love that feeling in games. Baldur's Gate 3 is so good at this, right? Of like, you walk into something and you feel like it's happening because of everything you did rather than because it was scripted, you know? Like, you walk in and you're like, this happened because of the shit I have done for the last 10 hours. That's the only reason this could happen. And so it feels so like mind-blowing and catered to you, even though technically it's not.
Well, but Baldur's Gate does a double trick because on top of what you just said being true, it also impresses upon you that there's multiple ways out of this situation as well that are subject to your creativity and your thinking, and like it. So you somehow created this situation, even though you didn't, but it feels like somehow you've done that. And then there's no prescriptive, like, oh, I have to find the answer. Even though there is a finite number of answers, it does such an amazing job at convincing you. It's like this game was made only for you.
It totally does. It's without
funny.
AI, really. Like, that game is just
mountains of content.
It's just so much content. Yeah,
it's just a team, passionately and obsessively.
It's amazing.
Just endlessly laboring. Yeah, it is. It's funny because the designer side of my brain, like if I fantasize about making a game, I'm so much more interested in that. I am not interested in, I've got this amazing story and I want to pace you through it, and there's going to be this one moment where everybody goes, oh my God, can you believe that so-and-so was murdered? Or what? Like, I am not interested in replicating or mildly gamifying the movie watching experience or the game. To me, that was the whole conceit of Stray Gods. It's like, can we make it feel like you've created your own full musical, basically. You've curated such a wide spanning set of building blocks that
it's the beauty of video games.
That it's your own. That strikes me. But it's funny because when I think about some of my favorite games ever, Grim Fandango, The Last of Us, BioShock, Mass Effect, they don't do that. Now, of course, I have played the living bejesus out of like Dead Cells and Hades and games that very much are along the lines of the first category. But yeah, or like my number one most played game, other than the weird fake Black Flag, which I loved, by the way. I probably did.
I also love that game, but not 400.
But XCOM 2 is 189 hours.
XCOM 2
that's all real hours of really playing
of you creating the exact situation that you're in, not of the. Because one thing I love doing with XCOM, especially in XCOM 2, is naming.
Oh yeah.
Naming them after people I know.
Basically guaranteeing a need for therapy.
Yes. So you name them, like I've got a little Austin running around in XCOM 2. Because I feel like when you name them after people you know, of course.
Like, fuck you, you deserved that.
Get out of here. Finally,
you were designed
he's done.
to be disposable.
It's like, it makes it even more personal to your particular story, which is also why they allow you to name Pokemon, right? Like, that's literally part of the design strategy. You rename your Pokemon so that you feel more of an attachment to them.
Isn't it stupid how effective that works? How effective that is? Like, isn't it hilarious how manipulable that reveals us to be?
Crazy.
That I can take a character that looks basically not, like, you can even design it, but you're like, yeah, but this is what Alanah would look like with a fucking mohawk and like super jacked arms and like a machine gun on it.
But I called it Alanah.
I typed in the letters and now I'm suddenly devastated.
We do love names. Yeah.
Especially because it's not just, oh, they were killed. It's, I fucked up and caused their death. That's
is
the
it
way
because you are
characters die.
further humanizing the video game?
Oh, for sure.
Right? Like, it's just the humanization that the name gives it makes it a pathway for empathy, I think. But you're right.
It's just astonishing how
human brain
effective
dumb.
that is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will
Easily
say,
tricked.
on the subject of the bespoke versus the player, if not generated, player curated within a wide subset of possibilities. And one of the reasons why I tout The Last of Us as one of my favorite games and one of like the important games is entirely because of the surgery theater, the surgery room scene, where it's precisely because of the lack of agency that it's forcing you to do what is the only thing Joel would do, because the game is not asking you what you think. And I remember at the time I was so frustrated.
I was so angry at him.
Yeah, I was like, I don't want to kill these people. Like, I just scare them away. I recognize that the game wants me to rescue Ellie, and I can set aside that was not quite so morally obvious to me. I found myself thinking, well, there is the whole of mankind on the other end of this. Yeah. Like, shouldn't I think about this at least for a second? Like, yeah, okay, you want to save the sort of innocent child that you've spent the last 20 hours caring about, but like,
well, I think the game is trying to make you question which decision was correct. It's not trying to say you should want to save Ellie. I don't think it's trying to do that, at least. I think they're trying to be like, he's going to do it regardless. How do you feel about it? I don't think it's saying saving Ellie was the right thing to do.
To me, it read
it's
as,
just the thing Joel
I don't give
would
a
do.
shit what you think.
Correct.
Yeah, it was
correct.
like,
doesn't
Joel's
give a shit what
going to do this, and we're just willing to pause. Like, because I remember what I did is I was shot the ground or the ceiling thinking that they'll run away because they're not trying to kill me. And then they didn't. I was like, oh my God, I have to kill them. And that moment, because up to that point, I was going, this game is A+ writing and performance, and competent design, good survival shooter, but nothing revolutionary.
Yeah,
just
agreed.
Really well tuned.
That's why I was glad
when
they
I hit
remade
that moment, I was like, oh my God, holy shit, this is storytelling. This is a new type of storytelling. So
which
it's
part 2 also does. It makes you play as somebody you don't like. Like, it's like,
I will never understand the hate.
There are things about it that I get. There are things about it that I understand in terms of criticism. There are certain things that I don't get at all, which I like just tweeted the other day. Is like, I don't understand the people who criticize it specifically because it made them mad. Like, I didn't like that this thing happened. Thus, game bad does not make any functional sense to me. It's not trying to be comforting to you. It's not trying to make you happy.
I don't want to sound dismissive, but that to me is one of those, tell me you've never tried creating art without telling me you've never tried creating art. Yeah. Like, because anyone who has even the slightest empathy to the creative process can understand, this may not be for me, but that doesn't mean they did a bad job at what they were trying to do.
No.
Those are different things
exactly.
from each other.
It is I get so annoyed with that particular criticism of The Last of Us Part 2. I think there are things you can criticize it for. But it's also, I've spoken about this a million times. I think I spoke about this like 2 weeks ago on this show. It's just, I love that by the time that you're like, this game's too fucking long and I'm tired, so the people you're playing
they are tired.
Yeah. And you're like you're like, fuck, this keeps going. And Ellie's like, fuck, this keeps going. And Abby's like, fuck, this keeps going.
I know.
And I just love that so much. It's such a good way to like get you into those characters' heads. And the second game does the same thing. It's not telling you to like the things that are happening. It's telling you it doesn't matter if you like them or not, they're happening.
Yeah, exactly. And that there's a courage needed to make. It's why ultimately, while I would say Death Stranding is not for me, I would similarly say it takes a courage to commit so boldly to something that you could pretty reasonably predict will be polarizing, or at least divisive on some level. And I want a world where that's Kojima's making games that I am not crazy about.
Totally.
Because, what's the alternative? A bunch of fucking samey, safe, cynically lowest common denominator kind of shit.
No, I way prefer you make a bunch of shit that I don't like than to make a bunch of like milquetoast video games.
Yeah, no, heartily agree.
Anyway, good episode today.
Anyway,
how's the Grammys?
Oh, it was fun.
Once again, Alanah killed it.
Yeah, that was. She did a great job. There was a subtlety. I preemptively downloaded a picture of Pan from our game onto my phone so I could explain to people that I wasn't just trying to look arbitrarily cool, but it's actually very deliberately
intentionally
inspired.
cool.
But it's like, but it's not cosplay.
Yeah.
Because it's like, anyone who knows me is like, you don't typically put on purple glasses and, you know, this like, but it wasn't obviously an homage to something. And because,
That's
know,
what
like
I tried to do
year,
for the Game Awards, was like, I had a dress made that was very akin to the character that I was trying to go for. My hair was the same, but I wasn't trying to cosplay.
Yeah, it's a tough line.
It is a tough line because people are like, that's still cosplay. And I'm like, if you say so. Like, sure,
I mean, Alanah would argue that cosplay, because when she actually does it properly, she gets so crazily obsessed with the tiny details. And
I didn't recognize her one time when I saw her. I was like, who's this woman that just said hello to me? Because it didn't look like her. That was actually the Stray Gods launch.
Oh, yeah, when she did her Persephone.
And then I walked up to you and I was like, is she here? And you were like, yeah, she's right there. And I was like, oh my God. She said hello to me and I didn't know who she was.
Her, if you go look up her Ellie, her Last of Us, she's done an Ellie 1 and 2. And both of them, as much as I know her face and have spent countless thousands of hours, I still have a hard time clocking that that's her. It's just a shockingly...
Wow.
And it's not that it's like there's crazy makeup or stuff. It's just the subtlety of the makeup and the hair.
Yeah, I'm pulling it over on Twitter so people can see it. That's nuts. That really does not look like her at all.
Yeah, it's really impressive. And the funny one is the blue shirt Last of Us Part 2. She made that within a week of the very first teaser coming out, where you got that first glimpse, and she immediately went, because this was before I even met her, I think. Or no, I can't.
You would have been together then.
Yeah, maybe it was.
Part
but
2?
I'm pretty sure she wasn't living in the U.S. yet. Because it was like that very first teaser, like several years, I think, before the game came out. But anyway, so yes, Grammys were fun. All accolades happily to Gordy and Steven. They bested us on for Jedi Survivor. I 100% predicted,
which is very good.
All my tripod buddies and Liam and everybody came from Australia for the Grammys, and I was like, just so you know, my money is not on us. Yeah. My money is definitely on them.
It's hard to beat a Star Wars.
It's hard to beat a Star Wars, and
Stray Gods is a difficult game to present to a jury as well, I would think.
And they were, you know, one of the dirty secrets is that certain amount of awards stuff is on the marketing around the thing that's up for it. That's the whole for your consideration awards season thing. And Star Wars, what they did lent itself very well for that, because they basically recorded a mountain of music at Abbey Road with a big orchestra, and it makes for very flashy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, don't get me wrong, I make those videos all the time for my projects too.
Yeah.
Like,
but Stray Gods,
no shade thrown.
The appeal of the music in Stray Gods is in part the design of it. It would be a difficult thing to show to a jury that were not video game inclined.
Well, and also bear in mind that the Grammys are not decided by a jury. It's voted on by... It's a ballot to the Recording Academy, which is 20,000 people.
I'm counting them as the jury, but sure. So like,
in my mind,
that's even
jury
worse.
Is like how DICE and the BAFTAs work, where a group gets together and actively deliberate and discuss, and people evangelize.
So you would consider that the Game Awards doesn't have a jury either. It's just a vote. Just a bunch of people vote.
Yeah, and there's different trend lines when it's just an anonymous vote versus when it's a group of peers face to face.
Yeah.
Neither one is a magic bullet. There's no real determining of best or whatever in general, setting aside even just the subjectivity of that. Like, everybody has such unique personal reasons why they're even evangelizing for the thing that they are, that, well, I could go on. I could spend a whole other hour kind of unpacking the subject, but I think that nonetheless, the voting procedure is gonna influence, and there's a certain amount of just, I've heard of that thing, that ends up being part of it on some level. And again, I say all that, I've been a beneficiary of that, and I've been not the beneficiary of that. At the end of the day, my broader career goal was always to hopefully hone my craft to a level where I would be viably in consideration for those kinds of things. Whether I win or not, my work is realistically nominatable or awardable or noticeable or whatever, just as a function of I'm doing good work.
You've accomplished that. What does it mean that you've accomplished that already? You're pretty young for that.
It means
to have
that I'm
been done.
extremely grateful to even be nominated. And
You don't have a what now?
Well, the what now was always the blank page. Like, I remember John Williams was honored by AFI 10-ish years ago. The only time they've ever honored a composer, it's usually directors, actors, that kind of thing, where they do a big gala, an entire evening. You know, like when they honored John Williams, Harrison Ford came out and gave a speech. George Lucas gave a speech. Carrie Fisher gave a speech. Like, it was a big John Williams love fest. And so at the end of the night, finally he gets up and gives out an award. And he said what has to be the best accepted speech ever, because he goes, tomorrow I'm going to sit down and stare at the blank page again, like any other day. And I just hope that the work I'm able to do tomorrow can be worthy of everything that you've said here tonight. And it was one of those sentiments of the blank page is actually quite merciless, no matter how much people prop you up. So the what next is not actually that big of a problem, because the blank page takes care of
the what
that
next
for you. You know what I mean? Like, it is so daunting every time.
I'm really bad about what next in life, because like I wanted to get a job at IGN and then I did. And then I wanted to write a AAA video game. Now I am. I always have a what next. And I maybe that's an age thing. Maybe at some point in the next decade, I'll be like, I don't need a what next, but I'm so obsessed with what's the next goal, dude? What are we doing?
Well, my suggestion that I would humbly put forth is that at some point in my mid to late 20s, I shifted all my goals to be more process and more path. I want to be doing X as a way of life.
I do that with content creation. People go, I want this many followers. Mine with that is always, I want to have this impact. I want to try to make this many a week. I want to try to do this many things. So it's not about how many followers I have. And that works very well and it's very healthy. But that's not my career exactly.
To the extent that you're able to have that in your career, at least for me, it has served me well, because winning the little shiny object, or getting even like having certain salary goals, these things are all so fleeting.
But they're not up to you either, that you can't actually control them.
And things are cyclical. You can hit a goal. You know, there's so many, like, it's a great trivia game. How many composers or actors or famous people that I can name that are Oscar winners that you've never heard of? There's a lot, because
I don't care about awards. I care about having a thing to work towards, like an end place to work towards. And it works really well, again, for like hobby stuff. I've not figured out a means to do that in my career. I'm not trying to get promoted. I actively don't want to be promoted again. That's too many meetings. I already have too many meetings.
How very Kirk of you.
It's too many fucking meetings. And I'm sick of talking to people all the time. But I
get it.
I don't have one right now though. Like it doesn't exist, but I get very caught up in what next? Like, I wonder if there's a means for me to reframe that to something of a more positive impact than just, I want to work at IGN. I want to write a AAA video game. Like, maybe I can, I don't know, make something.
Well, you've had an unusually successful streak at hitting those things within a relatively narrow time frame.
I am very good at doing it. But
there is the question of, let's say your next goal is, I want to,
I do know what the next one is, but I I guess the thing more is that I wish I didn't.
Well, I'll make up one. Let's say you go, I want to be the next Mike Flanagan and be a showrunner on a TV show. Mm-hmm. Let's say that was your goal. Based on your up to this point life experience, you're like, okay, couple years should be enough time.
Genuinely,
to hit that.
100%, I could do that. I have so much faith in my ability to action a goal. But I'll never be fulfilled, will I?
But so much, again, I know some really talented people that just, for whatever reason, pounding the pavement 10, 15 years, that somehow never came together.
It just
and
has
not
happened
for lack
for
of
me.
ability.
It doesn't mean it always will.
Yeah, well, that's where I say past events don't necessarily guarantee future predictions. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But there are certain things that just have to come together. So that's where I go, ask yourself, if you made that your goal and then you spent the next 10 years and at 10 years from now you were no closer to achieving it seemingly than you were.
Would I still have had fun trying to do it?
Or would you feel like I'm some failure, I'm destroyed? Because that, in a way, would mean it was sort of a self-inflicted wound, I would argue.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. I think that the motivation is what's important to me. Anyway, this is a therapy session that doesn't need to be on this podcast.
Fair enough.
We can talk about this really anytime, about my obsession with goals, being goal-oriented, and why it gives me peace with being alive. But that's like a whole other topic to unpack.
Peace with being alive.
Yeah, what is point of living if not move towards next goal, question mark? You know what I mean?
It was a great thing on Twitter the other day where somebody goes, sex is great, but have you tried just the incredible like terror that it is to just simply live or something? And what I loved was somebody did like a quote tweet of that said, this is basically just the entire summary of season 6 of Buffy. And I was like, holy shit, what a perfect, like no notes. Just
nailed it.
Absolutely nailed it, and why I love it so much. And yeah. Anyway.
That is very good. Anyway, this is Play Watch Listen, everybody. I'm Alanah, that's Austin. And Mike is at Dice. We've finally got a cadence where the show is now coming out every second week. I'm trying to keep that. We are coming out twice a month.
I'm way more comfortable with that.
Because we can also, if we need to record next week, we still can. I'll just hold it for another week because we're so rarely timely. So we're now every second Friday. Look at us go. Regular schedule's back.
Nope, it helps.
Yeah, which works out super well. We can record whenever. I do also have an announcement that I'm going to make now, but that we also need to reiterate. Basically, we had some extra money from Patreon that I had asked Austin and Mike. I was like, how should I allocate these funds? There's like some money that's come in here that I could feasibly, in theory, tie to being Play Watch Listen money. What should I do with it? And so we decided to use that money to fund a project on Kickstarter. As like a little pay it forward attempt was kind of the idea. So we put some funds together, and I'll give you some more detail. Maybe next episode we'll actually properly talk about it, but the idea is there'll be like some Play Watch Listen references in this video game, which is very cute. We get to like design a skeleton or something. But that, yeah, anytime that we like would effectively be profiting, we are instead going to pay it forward to indie game devs, which I think is cool and a fun thing to do. We should, in theory, be able to do one a year. Just help somebody fund a game. So, yeah, we'll get more detail on that when that Kickstarter project is further into fruition as well. I'll feature it a little more heavily. But yeah, a long piece of video game writer, awesome video game composer. See you next time. Bye.